treasured, our mountains, the water, the animals, the birds, everything. That's what our life is as Indian people.
When the United States government first created the Flathead Indian Reservation in 1855, the mountains and valleys of what is now western Montana remained an Indian world where people lived by Indian ways. The sacred falls on the Flathead River were known by the Kootenai word Kutakanuk and by the Salish word Stipemetku. This was the place of the falling waters.
Of course it was good. We didn't know it was that good. That's things are good, but you don't realize.
But 80 years of assaults on the sovereignty of the people led to the construction of this massive dam by the Montana Power Company. Now the Confederated Salish and Kootenai tribes are preparing to take over Kerr Dam for the first time. But the question remains, is this dam inherently destructive of the traditional native cultures, or can the tribes use it to help regenerate the way of life it helped destroy? Since the time when coyote made the world safe for human beings, Indian people have inhabited the mountains and valleys of what is now western Montana. It is a land generously blessed by the Creator. The Kootenai, the Pend and the Salish or Flathead, each of these three tribes had its own homeland and its own distinctive culture. And for many thousands of years, the people lived well by their traditional ways.
The people of the tribes used approximately 22 million acres of western Montana. And in that 22 million acres, the Salish and the Kootenai and the Qlispes or Pend, they traveled a life cycle. And that life cycle allowed them to live freely.
The natural world was more than a collection of resources to be used. Everything of this earth was alive with spiritual power, and the people lived upon the land with careful respect. But beginning in the 1850s, non-Indian people would impose a very different way of life upon this region. During a brief 90-year span of time, this tribal world of hunters and gatherers would be displaced by an industrial market economy, a transformation that would ultimately lead to the construction of Kerr Dam on the lower Flathead River. In many ways, the story of this dam is the story of conflict and exchange between deeply opposing ways of life. Kerr Dam stands as the product of an 80-year invasion of the Flathead Reservation, an invasion whose origins may be traced to the Treaty of Hellgate in 1855. U.S. officials, led by Governor Isaac Stevens of Washington Territory, were seeking to confine Indian people throughout the region to reservations and to take the rest of the land for white settlement.
But when you take the treaty and consider the reservation, it's 1,240,000 acres, and you pull the people back into that kind of acreage, there's no way you could live in the old lifestyle.
The tribal leaders ceded 22 million acres of what is now western Montana to the United States. In return, the U.S. promised the Indians peace, sovereignty, and a perpetual right to live by their traditional ways. But the chiefs also reserved from cession some of the tribal lands, including what is now called the Flathead Indian Reservation. Still, this was a small piece of the tribal land base. The Treaty of Hellgate of 1855 can be seen as the first step on the road to Kerr Dam. For many years after the treaty, however, many of the Indian people continued to inhabit the ancestral lands outside the reservation. For much of the 19th century, we were able to live largely by our traditional ways, moving with the cycles of nature, and taking a varied and rich sustenance from the land.
I could remember them things. And a lot of these old people, like these women folks rather, they'd go out and in the summertime, they'd get choke cherries and savage berries, like beetroot in the springtime, and also camas. That's all we used to live on.
Beetroot, camas, an abundance of game and waterfowl, rivers and streams teeming with fish. The people remained in harmony with this great abundance because we lived together as tribes. We shared much and owned but little as individuals, and so never exhausted the natural world around us.
Well, my dad just took 9 families. They have their own teepees, their horses. Each teepee had a bunch of big family, 9 teepees. So when they get meat, they pass it to every teepee till everybody gets enough for the winter.
Here the same way down here a long time ago. When you go hunting, and if you get one, you feed people, you know. That's how come the people used to get something to eat every day. Never get hungry because they help one another.
That's why in the old days we did have an awful lot of fishes in any kind of a fresh body of water, and the prairies and the woods and everywhere was full of game birds and wild game animals. That was because we conserved them, because we were trying to save them for the future.
These elders grew up in a world that was far from the wage labor and industrialism that would be brought through the Flathead Reservation by Kurdam during the 1930s. Their lives were shaped by their tribal connection to one another and by a powerful spiritual connection to the land. In the traditional value system of the people, nothing was more taboo than waste or disrespect.
The people don't waste the meat them days. They clean the hide, you know, they scrape the hide from the inside the meat. They dry that, they fix it, even the head.
Even the bones, when they're ready to come back, the women pound it and cook it. That's where they get this tallow, what they call it. So they never waste anything, no days.
They take care of the bones good and put it tied up and hang it up. Whatever they're not going to use, that's what they do. That's what I know. Uh-huh.
The cultural and spiritual world the elders speak of has survived into the present day in spite of a Jesuit missionary effort that began in the Bitterroot Valley in 1841.
You know, before the priests, they call it black robes. They prayed to the sun or things like that. That's all they lived by. It's a long time ago.
I mean, our effort was is to instruct them in our faith. And so the Indian faith was very secondary, and it didn't really, I mean, we didn't make much effort to learn it, because we were trying to teach them the new, the gospel, and all of that, and our whole effort was in that direction.
There were many pressures upon the people and the traditional way of life during the late 19th century, and all of them, even the religious efforts of the Jesuits, were part of the road that led eventually to the construction of Kerr Dam.
I think that the Jesuit way of viewing their religion as the only way, the one true religion, is very ethnocentric. But I think that constitutes cultural invasion. When you determine that your way is superior to another group of people, and you go in, no matter what way, whether it's as a missionary or as a soldier, and you decide that you're going to eradicate someone else's religion or someone else's culture because you deem that yours is superior and theirs is inferior, that's invasion.
Rather than by the will to power.
Many of the people, especially among the Salish and Pend, strongly embraced the Catholic religion, but most also maintained their traditional spiritual practices. And very few chose to change their tribal ways of hunting and gathering while they were still able to take these foods from a bountiful environment.
Nakanetik kaslahat since nakapikakonis. Oh, quas Johannikos Natanik Skawakistan. At nits own was it one in the Kasa Kastitmo, at nits own wool it one at Supkas. At Sukwakatis, Sawamo, a Kusak skoked it massin. It's in Skaksakan, Smaknik Siksakapmone, a Kusaks.
He, Sutskasi. Yes. Kost, that's good. Hamskelt.
Despite this abundance and obvious happiness of the people, the Jesuits intended to convert their subjects to a very different way of life.
Very shortly after the Jesuits arrived, they became convinced that the only way to convert the Salish was to, well, for one, to get them from wandering around or running around or chasing the buffalo, is, you know, the terms that the Jesuits use, and to have them settle in one spot so that they could teach them Catholicism, but also to provide their needs for sustenance, have their culture based on agriculture, you know, replace the hunting way of life with an agriculture basis of life.
But while it was still feasible to hunt and to gather for their subsistence, the people had no desire to abandon their traditional ways for agriculture.
The Indians had no occasion to be hungry at all times because since the food was grown so in such great quantities in the country. In the old days, if an Indian was told, you'd better start raising cattle and grow your own, garden, it would be like telling you to dig a well when there's mountain running water on both sides of your house so that you'll have drinking water.
By the 1880s, however, with non-Indian farmers, ranchers, and miners pouring into western Montana, the tribes were faced with a newly restricted resource base. Some tribal people finally began to turn to agriculture to supplement, but not replace, their hunting, fishing, and gathering.
Sei jo heute kommt es eten, zu mir krebs Gott, und ich will nicht, 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 ich will nicht big garden. My dad was up school. Good. A patak, some to, squad quadly, dam turtle. Squad quadly, slukum, chatakach, con koi, and skali hukan. Stem to school. Yeah, she my dad. By Crow Creek, okay, house. She made big garden.
It was not until the 1890s that most of the native people of the region were forced onto the Flathead Reservation. The Kootenai pressured out of the Tobacco Plains area to the north, the Salish removed from their ancestral Bitterroot Valley. By the turn of the century, the native people were being forced to alter their lives, but they had not yet lost all control over the pace and direction of change.
The tribal people that had taken to farming were doing pretty well for themselves. They had nice farms, they had good workable land, and they also had the promise of the irrigation system, and all of this lent to success as such, not a corporate type success, but individually, a number of the tribal people were doing well.
Cascadi, conquint, Tamka conquint school, garden. Come yet deer meat, she said, can make some dry meat. My Kenneth, my brother, Bien, she called them dry meat, deer dry meat.
At the same time, now that many of the people were living in towns or on farms, the Catholic Church was beginning to exert a much stronger influence. Enormous boarding schools were built around the town of St. Ignatius, and children were required to attend by the U.S. agent, by the priests, and increasingly by the Indian parents themselves.
I learned lots from that. I learned how to cook. I learned how to do things that in the white man's world, you know.
Just not English. Because you just near. Oh, I see out there down here.
See, our schools were boarding schools then. There were very few day scholars because day scholars would live at home, and one of the main things is that they must learn to talk the English language. And if they're living at home, why, they're talking Indian all the time.
Well, believe you me, that sure put a hardship on my schooling there, because I did not know a word of English. It would be just like you going to China or Russia or somewhere and attending the school there and not knowing their language at all. You'd be completely lost.
But they took on after, I would say 6 months or more, they would be orientated back to the white ways, because the first ones that we had, it took time to get them to take on the white man's ways. But once they came in, well, then when they were in school, they would help change the mentality of the students, of their playmates, one thing or another.
The turn of the century was a time of great pressures for the people here. Epidemics of European diseases continued to sweep through the area, taking heavy tolls among tribal elders. People were harassed and even killed for hunting off the reservation, even though this right was guaranteed by treaty. And throughout the country of western Montana, non-Indians were beginning to settle and control the land.
As time passed, the non-Indian even became aggressive over the existence of the reservation. In fact, they would look up and say, you know, look at all that wonderful farming land, and here's all these Indians up here, and they don't know what to do with it. And so there became a movement, an attitude of the settlers that that's an awful waste of land. We should be getting that reservation. It should be opened for settlement so some good use could be made of the land.
Of all the factors that eventually led to the Montana Power Company's construction of Kerr Dam, none was more important than the Allotment Act. In 1904, soon after the epidemics, Representative Joseph Dixon, a Missoula businessman who owned land on the reservation, pushed a bill through Congress allowing the president to open the Flathead Reservation to white settlement. Despite overwhelming opposition among tribal members, Dixon found a loophole and got the bill passed. The result was that communal ownership of the land, the basis of the tribal economic system, would be brought to an end. The Indian agent on the reservation would allot individual tracts to individual people. The rest of the land on the reservation, much of the best land, was declared surplus by the U.S. government and actually thrown open to white settlement.
It acres, Katan was acres, amakis. Hakikam ketukliska. Kapak smaknik. Kukan kapnika takataskin. Hakikam ketukwapne.
They call it making checkers, meaning that they start cutting the reservations.
Asikotis namakt. Taknakmo kwakmin amako nauninanak sakake. In Pablo, in Batmal Nahapwe, in Sunko, Kokaknin Amak, Kokaknisne. Utsinakats Kusakam Kotikat Namak Tsindukunin.
In April of 1910, the gates were opened and whites flooded onto the Flathead Reservation at a staggering pace.
Well, they did no more than open the reservation. And boy, you talk about the immigrants are coming in. Horse and wagon, buggies, some pack horses.
You'd go out to Charlotte, in that country, horseback, and when you'd be coming home late in the evening, hell, maybe the trail you took going out, when you come back, you couldn't go on it. There'd be a wire fence and a shack there. There'd be a homesteader pulled in there and set up his homestead outfit.
My grandparents, my parents always felt that they didn't belong in certain parts of town, when in reality this was their land. This was their home first before anybody's. They are not the visitors. They are the residents of this area, but they were made to feel like visitors.
No, I always said that was the worst thing they ever done was when they threw this reservation open.
That's government. That is job. We got no more land. That time we got land, we can go any place but put the camp in the place. Now government give us land 8 acres. We grab it. We're crazy.
In the lands where the wild food grew, you see those lands were sold to the whites by the government. That is what they homesteaded there. And of course, if Indians went up there, they'd say, could we pick some of the fruits which are in your country or in your land? If the man was mean, he'd say, you go to hell, get it elsewhere. This is private property. But if the man was kind enough, then he'd say, yeah, go ahead. And then they'd dig. And then after a while, wherever the wild food grew, then it was plowed up. Then that would kill off those wild food. There'd be none left.
The Indian people of the Flathead Reservation were unaccustomed to both farming and private property, and they became easy targets for those whites who had long coveted their land. With the aid of U.S. Indian agents who were either negligent or corrupt, much of the good farm acreage was quickly taken over by the old licensed Indian traders and a new group of white land dealers.
When you come to the concept of ownership of land, it was something new to the Indian. Whereas with the European, that ownership concept is well embedded in their society. So as they came in contact with the Indian, they were well practiced in the ways of getting land, claiming land, and holding it. And the Indian was not prepared for this.
We got nothing, we got no plow, anything. You sell your land, tomato 8 acres, just like that. No more land.
In the half-century since the Treaty of Hellgate of 1855, the people of the Kootenai, Pend, and Salish or Flathead tribes had journeyed through worlds of change. The Allotment Act, combined with other pressures we have seen, in many ways subverted the promise of cultural coexistence held out by the treaty. Less than 3 decades later, by 1939, the invasion of the Flathead Indian Reservation would culminate in the construction of Kerr Dam. Yet through all of this, the people still maintained their ancient cultures, still survived, and still fought back.